Yes. Good morning again to everybody here. As mentioned before, the title of my presentation is Distance Education Involve Parents in Language Learning. Here is the structure of my speech. First, I will start with the background of the study and the view from the bridge. I mean, what I experience and how I consider it right now. The aim of the study, methodology, findings, and discussion. First of all, what the background of this study is, what led me to do this research, and what are the factors that actually led me to do such a detailed kind of talk. Yes, we all remember the disruptive effects of the pandemic and the natural disasters we have experienced so far. And we can now divide the time as before the pandemic and after the pandemic, which influenced the lives of people, millions of people. And of course, this was also a factor in education. And the stones laid on the path of education have been removed, and it also has its influences nowadays as well. We can talk about the before and after the pandemic because, as I stated before, everything has changed in our lives. So this also affected education and the parents' attitudes toward the education, because parents have always been in the field of education this way or that way, particularly as while they're collected as a research, some areas that parents used to be involved, such as the parent-child communication about school, for example, or home supervision. Parents often supervise their children when they were at home, and this always happened. It's not after or before the pandemic. It has always existed. Check their homeworks, or they assisted their children's homework, or education expectations and aspirations for their children, how they expected their children to be is also considered in the name of parental involvement. Attendance and participation in school activities. Of course, parents always did this. And reading with children to have a leisure time or something. They often communicated with schools. Their styles as parents or parental attitudes towards education were always actually on the agenda of educators. You see, this is 2014 kind of research. The main titles are like this. So we have always had parental involvement in our lives as the parents themselves, as the educators, the communications between the parents and the school, and so on. So then we are talking about, if we are talking about parental involvement, also we are talking about the related research after the pandemic in terms of parental involvement. The research says, these are the main titles, there is a need for a change as for parental involvement. Because after the pandemic, things have changed a lot. So we can talk about some other kinds of involvement, not just the involvement that we mentioned before. As for the post-COVID practice, we have witnessed a lot of research and the parental involvement itself. Effects of COVID-19 were also the research titles. COVID-19 and education and teachers' views, particularly, were the research items. So the view from the bridge. This is the metaphor I use from my own experience of considering the things after the pandemic and even during the pandemic, because now I can see it from the view point of view from the bridge, because when we look down in retrospect, we can see and evaluate things more effectively. So this view is bringing about the pandemic times to me. When I think about those times, those years, first I can remember the lockdown experience. The same, I think it's the same for everybody. So overnight, we saw, as parents, we saw them becoming as facilitators because things have changed, and parents actually became the unique members of the education at home because they had to arrange everything. They had to facilitate everything. This is from my own experience in my immediate environment, the families, the friends, their children, everybody involved in this process. And the physical classrooms were replaced by virtual classes, we know. Now, at that time, of course, there were no classroom walls. 4 walls were just limited to the sand, the 4 corners of the screen. So things changed, and of course, this reflected some kind of change onto the education. So the shift of the role from the parents' maternal responsibility moved towards their adapting their houses to classroom environments, which was really interesting for the parents. Maybe they had never ever experienced such a situation. So parents became homeschoolers. They had to educate their children at home during the lockdown. Maybe after sometime after the lockdown, when the schools opened through the distance education, children were still attending schools, and of course this happened very quickly, and children started to experience their own education at school. So for the homeschoolers, there was a need to observe, guide, and encourage their children because they had to let them adapt to the new condition. So children did not own the responsibility of learning because this often accumulated within the teacher's responsibility to let the children study or conduct how they supervise, how they should study, or teachers often let their students to go and somehow get involved in the education. So this invitation was not existent anymore. So parents had to assume this role of inviting their children to the education. So the aim of and the focus of this research is actually the effects of the pandemic on the parents' part. How did parents feel about it? And their activities towards these unpredicted events. It was all of a sudden it happened, and the parents had to have some kind of educational attitudes. Maybe most of them were not involved in education at all. And the challenge they had with the advent of distance education, it was a challenge for them because parents were just parents for the children. They were not teachers, or they were not the other organizers of education. The solutions parents provided to compensate for the language learning courses, because language learning is a more specific and more particular field, and it requires a little bit more attention because it is unique in its own. So the methodology of this small-scale research, it's not a very big kind of research, because I worked with 20 parents appointed through the purposive sampling procedure. I asked for their volunteers, evolutions, and volunteer parents worked with me. I asked them an open-ended questionnaire in the first place, sent them, asked them to fill in. It was a small-scale focus group that I worked as a follow-up and then a face-to-face interview for the purpose of triangulation. So this was the research design. As for the findings, these parents answered the questions on the survey that I sent, and I saw that they had found very many practical solutions because these parents were involved into language teaching somehow, and maybe they did this for the other disciplines as well. 99% of these parents were women. They were mostly dealing with their children, quite possibly with their education. But as I stated before, this is a small-scale research. It should be extended to large numbers. But I wanted to see what was happening in my immediate environment. Before the pandemic, I asked the parents a few questions, 10 questions, I should say. One of them is, how they organize the education of their children before the pandemic? They answered that there was a web-based learning that they often made use of, and they had their teachers as a central role, and they found formal schooling enough for them. This was the first finding that I underlined as a fact, because the school was playing a very important role, and so were the teachers before the pandemic. So when I asked about their roles after the pandemic and during the lockdown, they said they became the facilitators of the language learning and education. I asked the parents as a first question how they felt when the pandemic, there was the outbreak of the pandemic, and their first reactions were shock. The first one, they said they were shocked because they did not know and they could not perceive the situation in the first place, the extent of the disruptive effects of the pandemic. And maybe the second one was the fear, because people were frightened to lose their members of the family, and of course there were many losses, and anxiety and hopelessness, because they felt hopeless due to both what to do and what not to do, because parents were also the members of the groups that actually got involved in the whole system. So the other findings are the lockdown actually let the parents do something that they should be dealing with in terms of education. And they, as for teaching, they stated that they had taken extra help, and they made use of, when I asked them what kind of resources they used, they made use of digital resources and books available in their homes, because you will remember, we could go nowhere, we could get no help. So available within their hands, digital resources, and all the possible things that they were able to have access to. And in terms of the children's attitude, there was a question. They stated that children were actually adapted to the new situation very quickly, because they are the digital natives, as Prinsky states. Children can easily adapt to the situations, and of course the way they use the technology in their daily lives help them do this. And teachers were asked about their comments after the lockdown. I asked the parents how the teachers behaved after the lockdown. They stated that teachers were mostly satisfied with the level of their students, and some teachers did not make comments. It is quite possible they were not able to identify the situation yet. And the teachers themselves actually were able to get in touch with the whole education system through the distance education, and excuse me, and the teachers were able to get involved in the education as a second parents. The first facilitators were the parents. So the last question was, what kind of measures they were planning to have in case of such a breakdown or such an interruption in education? Hopefully not, but we might have such instances in the future. When they were asked, they said actually they had not planned many measures in action, but of course they were planning to make use of the digital world, distance education, or the possible things that they could use after that time, because this is a kind of experience, to my interpretation, that they have had successfully and not much problem with this interruption, maybe a kind of shock at the first place, but a very fast transformation to the digital world. So from then on, I think parents are ready to facilitate all the education, particularly language learning, because they know the sources now that they can make use of in terms of language learning. Resources are available now, all the learning platforms, language learning management systems, the online tutors, everything has actually got ready since that time. And nowadays we can talk about education more safely. In the future, if we should encounter such a problem, I think we won't have much trouble with education stuff. As a conclusion, we can say that natural disasters and illnesses are the catalysts for such actions. We need more autonomy. I mean, more autonomous learners. And the learners and the parents need more autonomy. Practical solutions we should be seeking, such as the parents' solutions that we have come across. Parental involvement will be on the agenda of language learning. So I think parents should be educated on how they should be dealing with their children, and they should be conducting such things. ICT use and I think the infrastructure for ICT should be a little bit more fostered so that in the next coming years we could cope with such disasters more. We need more plans for the future and more actions to take. Measures, yes. We need to have in our reservoir kind of measures that should be taken through these times. And this is the end of my presentation. And here are the references. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you.